have today will speak about, from the perspective of startups, about smart mobility made in Israel, serving the entire world. And I think you've heard a lot from prior speakers about the fact that 5 years ago there was, maybe 20 startups in the domain. Today there are a few hundreds by various counts. We're seeing all the largest players in the global value network coming to Israel. What we're doing at Capsula Studio is accelerating startups to traction. And we are a partnership between Tel Aviv University and Fuel Choices and Smart Mobility Initiative. As an institute in the university with no business model, we just work really hard. In fact, today we're featuring our 7 graduating startups. All of you are invited to our demo day. That's at the Porter Building or Porter School of Environmental Studies at Tel Aviv University. There is a bus that's going to be going out of here at 5:45. And the next year is going to be interesting for us as we restructure from an institute in the university to a self-sustaining commercial entity with commercial sponsors, one of which is already sitting here in the crowd from SNCF, our first sponsor. So with that, I'd like to ask the panelists to introduce each one of you in order, and then we'll have hopefully a kind of an intimate discussion on stage on what it means for smart mobility to be made in Israel.
Okay. So my name is Chagai. I'm the CEO of Autotalks. I think maybe just to explain what we do. So recently, somebody in the media called us the WhatsApp of automotive. So we are all about exchanging messages, exchanging information between vehicles, and the idea is just to prevent accidents in what we call non-line of sight conditions. I just drove my kids just last weekend, and I went just across the hill next to home, and all of a sudden a car came just across the hill. Luckily, I was not driving too fast, but I could imagine what would happen if that would be slightly differently. This is exactly the kind of use cases that that such technology is trying to address. So intersection, people who don't obey stoplights or traffic lights, all those cases where you can't see the other vehicle approaching. So what we believe is part of eventually saving lives, not just in autonomous driving, but in any car. And that technology is starting to roll out from 2019 in light vehicles in Europe, in US. So that's what we do as a company. I think it's a very exciting environment these days in general.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Omer Keilaf. I'm the CEO of Innovis Technologies. We are a startup developing technologies for autonomous cars. Specifically, we develop a sensor that creates 3D perception for cars. That is one of the hurdles in autonomous cars today because of today existing technologies are not good enough, are too expensive, and really too large and not reliable. So Innovis is developing a tiny sensor that can be at a price point that can scale. We actually started last year, and we already have a lot of activity in the industry. We just had a new wonderful partner, Delphi, that also led our last round. We just actually announced a $73 million round yesterday with more participants from Samsung and SoftBank, and today over 100 people and very active in the space. That's all.
Hi, my name is Karen Fanan, and I'm leading the Ventures department at GET. GET is an on-demand mobility platform helping people get from A to B. And the Ventures department is basically a startup incubator within the company. We're trying to leverage the same technology and operational excellence and entering new mobility segments. One of our ventures is Get Delivery, which is an on-demand platform for last mile delivery. And the second venture is Get Together, which is an on-demand shuttle solution.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Dror Meiri. I'm VP of Business Development at Adasky. Adasky is an Israeli startup company based in Yokneam in the north. We are a team of 57 employees, and what we're developing is a new type of sensors for ADAS and for autonomous vehicles. This is how it looks like. It's a very small sensor that is capable of enabling the vehicle to understand in a very good way its surrounding at any lighting and any weather conditions, and even at a very high range of 200 meters and more. Try to imagine a situation that you guys are driving at night in a highway, and out of the sudden there is an animal running a few hundred meters away from you, or when you are driving and there is an incoming headlights or sun that make you pretty much blinded. Our solution basically solve it, and this challenge is even more difficult in autonomous vehicles that it does not have the human intervention that can take the right decision. So again, with our solution, we can overcome those challenges.
Hi, my name is Oren from Electrode. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the company. We developed an electric vehicle that drives without a battery. So how we do it? We deployed coils under the asphalt at the middle of the lane, and we transfer energy directly to energize the engine. By doing so, we dramatically reduced the size of the battery, and we created a vehicle, a bus, a car, autonomous vehicle that can drive 24/7. We closed a round, and we are focusing on finishing a full-scale demonstration. First implementation, I hope it will be in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and our go-to-market is Europe.
Well, thank you. So I think a very interesting team, because we have infrastructure, vehicle-borne sensing, vehicle-borne communication, and actually it's not just vehicle-borne, it's not just V2V, it's V2X, and consumer-facing service. Naturally, or maybe not unnaturally, we think we are at the center of the world, and Israel is, I think, by various studies and rating systems, is accepted as one of the top 10 ecosystems of entrepreneurship and innovation in the world, alongside, of course, Silicon Valley, New York, Boston, London, Shanghai, Beijing, and a few other small cities in the world. But what's really unique about Israel is we are the only one of those ecosystems, one of those countries that has less than 10 million people and really no market to speak of. I'd like to hear from different companies. I think, from my experience, that most Israeli companies, because of that, start thinking out globally. And the question is this a handicap? Or do you think is this an advantage compared to other innovative ecosystems and your competitors, you know, in other countries? So, anyone, please.
I actually think that automotive space, you know, is a hard place to work at, but not just because we're in Israel, but in Israel in general, and I come from different industries. Actually, this industry is rather simple to work at. I mean, in other industry, always the market is not in Israel. So you're always working with the US or the Europe, and so I think everyone here knows how to work with other markets, and that's not different in automotive. Actually, automotive is a rather centered, concentrated market where you actually, you know, it's a B2B kind of approach, so you don't need to work that hard, even if it's out somewhere else, not in Israel. And you know, there's a big market in Europe, which is actually, you know, the working hours are really convenient. So I think in general, I don't think that being in Israel is it's a problem. It's actually very easy to work with automotive.
So I think that actually the fact that we are here in Israel and we don't have a domestic, a local market is an advantage for us, because we are a center of excellence for innovation and execution. Mainly in B2B technologies, and of course also in B2C, but mainly in B2B. And because we are doing lots of innovation, we find ourselves in a situation that we have very good exposures to executives in the industry. I think that the fact that we are in Israel enabled executives from OEMs, tier ones, and other thought leaders around the world to come to Israel to free up their mind and to meet Israeli startups and give them the attention. Actually, I think that if we were positioned in places such as Detroit, Germany, etc., it would be much more difficult for us to get the attention that we get when we are here, especially the attentions from companies that are not from our local market, such as Detroit, if we're a Detroit company, or Germany, vice versa.
Karen, what's your take on this as the only consumer-facing startup here?
Yeah, so I agree that Israel is a smaller market and it can be a disadvantage if you are looking for a massive scale and high volumes. However, it also can be an advantage for running experiments. Get very often experiment new products, new services, and new features in Israel. For example, our new startup Get Together was already launched in Israel as a pilot. We look at it as a control-based environment for running pilots. So it's an on-demand shuttle solution, and the first line that we opened was a line connecting a train station and our area of work, crowded business hub. So we get the chance to use our own product every day and to collect feedback from our friends, our colleagues, our even family members using our development on their day-to-day. And that's definitely an amazing advantage for us. And then once we prove the model to be successful, we copy-paste it to different territories.
Now, when you, territories is a loaded word, when you copy-paste it, so you have a big business in Russia, right? And New York or England
and
UK and the US. Mm-hmm. There are different cultural norms and social norms. Do you find that you have to make adjustments to those? And any interesting stories on that?
So, of course, we always have to adjust the product to the local market. I can also say that we identify Israelis as early adopters. Israeli consumers love technology and they try new things. They also provide a lot of feedbacks, which is great. And we also use it to really experiment the product itself. When we develop a new capabilities, we have to explore, find bugs, see that it works, see how customers and drivers adapt what we developed. So we do that firstly here in Israel, and then we launch it outside of Israel.
I can share a bit of not a different perspective, but kind of a mixed answer to that. So when you're early stage and a company starting, Israel is a huge attraction or attractor of investors, and it's a great community here. Especially now in automotive, I think Mobileye helped a lot, but I think even before that there was a lot of focus on what Israel brings, and in automotive industry, the system level know-how that exists in Israel is very good fit to what is needed in automotive environment. In a later stage, when you really need to touch a lot of customers, then comes culture. And we work in countries, we already announced that recently. We are working in Denso, which is a very large Japanese OEMs, and we have others. Very different culture, and there is a preference with those culture. Maybe in Europe it's more closer to us, so it's easy. It's Germany, and that's the focus. But I think with some of culture in Asia, there is a preference. There is sometimes a cultural gap, an understanding. So you have to be very close, and by default, the large local suppliers have an advantage. That there is a tendency to try to cooperate with local players. So you have to compensate, and the only value that Israeli company bring is something which is, I don't know, twice, 4 times, 10 times. It has to be better. It has to be priced right. But if it's not much better, then the default would be a local supplier. So that's I think a challenge when you move and get to the engagement stage with real engineers. Initially it's the investors, so it's all happy. But when the actual issues start, then you have to be very close to your customers, and then we are far away sometimes, and there is always cultural gaps. But I think when we bring enough value as a company, as an industry, they value a lot today what the Israeli industry brings. And they can look at it and say, wow, it's much better. And I think that ecosystem today exists a lot in Israel.
So maybe a corollary, and maybe you can blend this into your answer. I think 20, 30 years ago, that long that I've been an entrepreneur and investor, We used to fly over Europe, like Europe didn't exist, and the US was the market. In fact, at some point, I think after the US, the largest number of foreign companies on NASDAQ was Israeli. But now, you're working in Japan, you're working in Europe and the US, you're in Russia. At the early stages, how do you make the choice? Do you think there is a general preference, or is it opportunistic, or a small startup just can't afford to spread all around the world?
Well, I mean, I can tell you in our case, we actually go by the way that we see the customer's, timeline, and we're always focusing on those that we see are going to make decision first. Focus on those that are going to make decision before anyone else, so they can maybe become a reference. So we see in Europe many companies are more aggressive on timeline because they are now making design decisions on platforms that are going to be ready in 2020 or 2021. Those are commercialized cars that they need to close the design now, so they'll be ready for commercialization at that time. And in the US, we see companies are still trying to figure out, or maybe building platforms that you can put on top of cars and not really go to mass production. So we see in Europe a lot of companies now going to make their decisions, so we're really focused in Europe right now.
So I think that as a B2B company in this market, the number of players is pretty known, and it's limited. There are few dozens of OEMs and tier ones that eventually we should serve. And each one has its own cadence and its own pace for innovation, and eventually the world is flat. It doesn't matter whether it is Europe, Japan, US, or whatever. Wherever there is an opportunity and a large OEM that can innovate and can take the opportunity and move with us forward, that's what we are doing.
Okay, Oren.
I think we do have a market in Israel, not huge, but we do have a market, a very quality one. Cities like Tel Aviv, main cities in Israel, and even the leading companies are very open for technological innovation. Together with the government support, I think it's an excellent start for a startup company. Tel Aviv, for example, Tel Aviv is considered to be a global innovation hub. So for a startup company, to start a first commercial project in a city like Tel Aviv, it's not only initial revenues, but it could be a great exposure for, globally exposure. So we have a market in Israel.
Okay, and Keren, if I look at where your big markets are, how did you happen to put a stake in Russia rather than, some other market which is maybe more natural historically in Israel?
So when we launched Russia, it was an amazing opportunity. We were the only player at that time, and we identified the need back then to a ride-hailing app. And a lot of the time is also looking at cities with a more matured market or cities that need disruption, right? They need improvement in their transportation today, and this is how we choose where to go.
So I think kind of a related issue. In several domains, there have been claims by Israeli government, by spokespeople of Israel, that Israel is the ideal beta site. And obviously, Owen, you think Israel is the ideal beta site, especially Tel Aviv, world city. And maybe it's maybe also relevant, to other talks and to the sensor and cognition companies. From what you're seeing in Israel, especially as I think one of the big future markets we believe is going to be autonomous car. What do you think, can Israel be a beta site? I mean, is it going to be a beta site?
So I think that Israel can be a beta site. However, eventually the beta site is where your customers are and where your ecosystems are. So as for now, the beta site is the customer sites around the world. However, I think that if the trend that we see here of multinational companies, OEMs, tier ones, of opening offices and presence here in Israel will continue and will evolve beyond technology scouting, but also kind of testing facilities and experience and stuff like that. I think that with these kind of companies, we can definitely create a beta site that will be sponsored and managed by the large ecosystem from around the world that will come and converge here in Israel.
I actually think that, like Dror said, there is no one company actually in Israel that is doing, the driving decision or really building the platform for AVs. So those teams we don't have in Israel that talent, and no teams are actually trying to do that. So most of our customers are not in Israel. So those beta testing are not done in Israel. And I don't see anyone in Israel yet. I haven't seen anyone. And I think I can explain maybe why there isn't such a group in Israel doing that.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So it's just maybe my observation is one, the teams that are doing this today are located mostly in the States, where those teams come from Google or Apple. Actually, people that have done that for the last 10 years, and they came with that experience and brought up those teams. And we don't have that talent in Israel. The second is, I think, and you look at those companies when they were established, their first round was, tickets as hundreds of millions of dollars, like Zoox and Drive AI. Those groups had their first investment around the hundreds of millions of dollars. In Israel, VC, as much as it's rich and like very supportive, the VCs here are not, I don't think they're really capable of making those decisions of giving such amounts to really initiate such operations. In the States, you have those VCs to support it, and I think this is why you don't see that kind of investment done there. So I don't really think that you'll start to see a lot of activity of doing beta testing of full platforms in Israel.
I think, it's not only the kind of the driving policy, right? Or companies like, the Drive AI and, the company that GM acquired. But how about other talks? Because that is something that can be tested anywhere, right?
This is a global protocol that, we eventually have to speak the same language. I tend to agree, eventually we go where our customers are and they have facilities. So Israel can be a potential place where you take kind of new ideas to like a first proof of concept. So we have such ideas, and the government also put some incentives in place for big projects. The problem is with government money that it takes a long time to even roll out. So there's a lot of things that you have to do, and eventually as a small company, if you don't have anything specific to do, that you want to prove or it's critical for you, you focus your forces on where your customers are and not for such incentives. So in theory, eventually you go where, not in theory, in practice, you go where the customers are, and they have those places. So if we go, for example, to test drive solutions, we go to one of the German OEMs, and they have a run which is, I don't know, a few kilometers, and then drive in 2 or 250 kilometers per hour, test it. And we don't have that kind of, so they just started it recently in a road that is not open, whether this will stay open or not. So we don't have the OEMs to continuously invite you. You have to. So there is a first initiative here. I don't know if it will last for. So it has to be something which is stable, okay, that lasts for long and attracts the car manufacturers and the tiers to work here. Otherwise, you don't have the ecosystem to work together. So
that's pretty interesting. I think a couple of weeks ago, I was in a gathering set up by the Fuel Choices and Smart Mobility Initiative and the Israel Innovation Authority, what used to be the Chief Scientist's Office. I think there were 50, 60 people perhaps from various companies and organizations. And it was all actually about testing environments in Israel, MCD-like, those kinds of environments. And I think what I'm hearing is that, maybe is that not necessary? Should our government be focusing on other things we should be doing in Israel rather than that?
Well, again, my opinion is that for us, Israel is already a better site. It's a combination of the consumers being adaptive and open to new ideas, as well as the responsiveness from the government. For example, earlier this year, Get has partnered with the Israeli Post, which is a government service, and together we offer an on-demand solution for people to pick up their packages from the Post branch directly to your home. And the Israeli Post were very cooperative, and we launched this service extremely fast. And we had the same, we tried to do the same model in other territories, but we found out that actually here in Israel, they were very cooperative. And now we are actually taking, again, this model and try to launch it elsewhere successfully when we have a live example. Another example is Get Together, our shuttle service, and the Israeli train. We work together to offer a solution to connect the train stations to crowded areas, and they have been cooperative, and we are working together to find these solutions. We also see a lot of awareness from the local municipalities. So I actually do see it happen, and if I have to compare it to our activity outside of Israel, we managed to move things much faster here, and then we take it as live examples to other territories.
So it's not an anomaly that we have only one company on stage here which is consumer-oriented, perhaps one which is more B2G even perhaps, because that is what it looks like, and actually the statistics are even worse in terms of the percentage of smart mobility startups that are consumer-facing. Why is that? And how did you happen? What kind of DNA or culture do you have? And the question to others, you're all experienced serial entrepreneurs. You could have done anything you want. Some people claim that being closer to the customer with a service model is the best position to be at, and the one where it's hardest to replace you if you really win the hearts of consumers. So maybe first to you, Keren, how did that happen? And why aren't there more of you?
So I think that's the nature of our product, right? We are an app helping people get from A to B, now also helping them move things from A to B. So our core is a consumer-based solution. We also have a solution for enterprises, but we look at our solution for enterprises as a tool to get more scale in the consumer phase. So we use enterprises to meet more consumers. And I think that when you look at smart mobility, by design, it is a solution for the end customer. They're the one to use the services, they're the one to enjoy it and to change their habits. So it makes sense that the product will be oriented to the end customers and not for enterprises. So for us, it was quite a natural decision to go that way.
So what's the other people's thinking? Why didn't you do a consumer-oriented company?
So first of all, I'm not a founder of that company, so this specific question is not relevant. However, I think that in panels like that and in many discussions in Israel, this issue or dilemma of why you're not doing B2C and why the focus is more on B2B, something that repeats again and again. And I think that we don't need to be apologetic about that. We are good at what we're doing. We are good with heavy technology lifting companies and innovations. And I think that rule number one, you need to do what you are good at and even do it better and push the envelope and win the competitions that will come from around the world. We are good at B2B, that's where we excel at. Of course that we have exceptions, good exceptions such as Get, Waze, and others. But the fact that we are doing B2B is actually an enablement for revolutions around the world, such as the automotive, and we are doing the good things around here in Israel.
I agree. I think we should look at this issue in a different way, not to whom we sell the product, but to whom we solve a problem. If we create a product that dramatically reduces air pollution, it will improve quality of life for every one of us. So I don't think it really matters if the focus is B2B or B2C. Our mission is to solve one of the biggest problems today in the world, is to reduce the dependency on oil and reduce air pollution. And who cares if we sell it to government, cooperatives, or consumers?
I actually think that because we are far away from the market in some way, it's much easier when you have a very objective value. And you know, if you are developing technology that is, it's very simple to show where is the advantage that you provide to that system, it's much easier. Even if you're not from that culture, it's very objective to show that your product is better than anything. And the discussions become much simpler. It's very easy to go and show something that is better than anything than to maybe try to understand how it's connected with the culture, etc. Right? And I think if you ask about why we went to this direction, you know, the team, when we started the company, we were looking to do something meaningful and disruptive. And it was clear that the autonomous driving is going to be the next thing, and we were trying to find what's the biggest problem there that we can solve, and that's what actually drove us, and I think it's still driving the team.
I think maybe to comment, I think many of the beginning of the entrepreneur, you know, the startups and entrepreneurs in Israel is defense-oriented, either military units, various ones. You know, defense projects that were canceled in the 80s, or a lot of, and then it's evolvement through that. So a lot of us are either were there or are the second gen to that. So we have a system level know-how or an understanding of doing not consumer related. So that's the basis of a lot of startups in Israel. And that's why I think Israeli industry has more of that than consumer. Although there are some great, like Get and others, consumer-related startups. So I think in general that's one aspect to that. And the rest, I think a lot of, autonomous, my perspective around our company is trying to save lives. I think I've been in industries, communication and many others, and we created a revolution in communication. There was a lot of communication companies back in early 2000. That market evaporated, became commoditized, and I think the automotive industry offers today something to do better. I mean, to save lives. I mean, eventually, most of the people that sit here offer a technology that eventually will prevent a lot of agony, fatalities, death, injuries, and I think that's also a great motive to people who work.
So if I would summarize it, you know, because we don't have a big local market, and because we're very idealistic and we want to do good things for the world, we're focused on B2B, but perhaps more seriously, the first probe was about Israel not having a local market, and is that a handicap? And perhaps, although I think that Get and Via and earlier, of course, Waze in this domain have proven that they're able to go out there and do consumer-facing. And I think the reason for a company, you know, to address, Oren, what you said before, who cares what we do, you know, who we serve, no, who we serve.
What we do.
Yeah, who we serve, whether it's consumers or, you know.
Who cares? You know, you need to solve a problem first. So if you sell it to government or consumers, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, of course, but you know, when we do look at the richest, biggest, most valuable, highest growth companies, you know, that are now being derided as our owners in the world, like Facebook, Apple, Google, they're all consumer-facing. And the question I have is, are we missing out? Is Israel missing out because we're more comfortable with B2B?
Yeah, I'm sure we do. We can do more. I mean, I've just talked with a group coming here and asking me, there are so many technologies in Israel, why don't we see anyone trying to build a car out of it? And I think that's one of the questions that I tried to answer earlier. It's a shame. I mean, we could do more than that. And I would love to see a team in Israel that comes up and try to to actually create its own platform and not rely on someone from the US to do it.
Yeah, there is one, by the way. It's called GRIP, GRIIP, and they're focused on the niche of competitive cars, like race cars. So
Okay.
interesting niche, and it's admirable that they're really trying to do that.
Yeah, but I think there is much more to do there, and it is a shame that we don't see. I think we have the technologies to do that. I think there are many talents in Israel that are trying to build something in this industry. I would love to see such initiative. It will take a lot of capital to do it, and we will need to build those teams and train them and get that knowledge that we might be missing still here in Israel. But I think we should do it.
Well, that's interesting. Kind of connects to something I wasn't thinking of, but since Capsula is housed at Tel Aviv University, the Department of Engineering really wants to build cars. And most universities here have had groups that are doing these race cars. But it's kind of interesting that we're waking up and, not going back to the Susita world, I hope, but we're really seeing a lot of interest from interdisciplinary teams of mechanical, electrical, and software engineers to do modern cars that are built, in a different platform, different way, simpler, perhaps. So hopefully, you may be right, we might be seeing things like that. So I do want to leave maybe a few minutes, but I want to ask to raise an issue which might be a bit controversial. In the past 2 years of my being at Capsula, we're kind of tracking the rate of value network players, not just automotive companies, not just OEMs, tier ones, but also communication companies and other companies that are important stakeholders in this reshaping value network as they're coming to Israel. There's not a week goes by that we don't have a delegation from this country or another country or an OEM or mobility as a service, tier one, and so on. And we're seeing, I think, an increasing rate of global leaders from abroad setting shop in Israel. GM, I think, is the biggest by now. There are 300 or so engineers there and growing. Daimler set up earlier this year, at the beginning of the year. Delphi is announced now. And the question I have is, do we have enough engineers? And if we just project that forward and see some kind of an exponential rate, can we accommodate this? Are you worried about this as leaders of startups in Israel who are hiring and want to have the best people? Is there a fear or a worry that you may be priced out, that it's going to be overly expensive to hire and retain people?
So I think that as Thomas Friedman wrote in his book, The World is Flat. And those multinational companies who are coming to Israel are coming to seek for innovation and for talents. And it doesn't matter whether, for them, it doesn't matter whether the talents are in Tel Aviv, Yokneam, Beersheba, or in Mountain View. And eventually the competition for the low demand of engineers is all around the world. And we need to be aware, we as stakeholders and leaders of this industry, as well as government, universities, tax authorities, everyone need to understand that the world is flat. And if we will not enable the same conditions and the same prerequisites for the talents on one hand and for the companies on the other hand, we will find ourselves lagging behind.
I think it's a good thing. It's good to see those companies coming to Israel and investing a lot of capital in order to really strengthen education for the people and making us a better technical center. I think in Israel there are many industries, not only automotive, and you see that every time that a new industry is rising, then it dries up older industries, and you see talents going from one area to another. And I mean, we see a lot of people are really, they want to join this industry because they understand it's an industry that will evolve and you know, they want to join that. So we see a lot of talents coming from different industry. I don't think there is not enough for automotive. Might only dry up older ones, and that's fine. It happened in the past. I think, and it's been done in the past, that you know, once there was a certain industry evolving, then you would see some universities trying to be more focused on that area and maybe try to get those engineers speed up. So once they're finished their degree, they may be more capable and you know, more ready for it. I'm not worried. I think it's a good thing in general.
Let them come.
Yeah. In general, Israel becomes an ecosystem where you can hire, talent. And when you go to other places around the world, it's even difficult to get a certain expertise. Here, yeah, we always fight for talent against other startups, against the big ones. So, and we have to attract through, all kinds of things that every startup offers is the ability to influence and do special things and be, try to be someone very big. But at least the ecosystem exists and the talent exists. And everyone you choose, either the cybersecurity that you need in a solution like communication for vehicles, or be it radio, wireless, that comes from X, still there is a communication industry.
Like
but it declined, okay? So wireless technologies, radio technologies, anything that you need is available in Israel, and that's part of the strength that we have as an ecosystem. That is what attracts large corporates, because they can find various talents here and they contribute one to another.
Okay, so for the large corporates, we love you. Please come here and build your R&D centers, and we'll just create more engineers at universities, and perhaps dry out content delivery networks, ad networks, and so on. We just have 2 minutes, but I'd like to see if perhaps we can field 1 or 2 questions from the audience. Anyone? Yes, please. What advice? You're the older.
Yeah, my hair becomes gray already, so yeah, I'm probably the oldest. Advice, yeah, I think my humble opinion, or my best advice, is that a startup is a roller coaster. Yeah, one day you're up, one day you're down, and you need stamina, and you need a lot of desire, or you really need to want that, or otherwise, and eventually you must. If you believe in something, then the attitude is never give up. And even if you face competition or you face challenges with customers, eventually as a startup, you also measure with your passion how you can serve much better than other startups, or in some cases you fight the large corporates. We have in our industry also, yeah, big corporates, either European or American. So yeah, it's a roller coaster. It's a fun ride. Sometimes it's a frustrating ride. And get money as early as possible. So yeah, you can survive for enough time.
Good co-founders, commitment, persistence, and if you want, I'll be happy to talk with you after that to get more.
Do what you're good at and do what you love to do. This is one thing. Second thing is try to work with customers. Try to touch the market as soon as possible to get feedbacks, even if this is not an MVP, even if it's only for ideas and stuff like that. Don't work, in an open loop.
I think
Go ahead.
solve a real problem, work really hard, and choose the best partner.
So since what I do day in and day out is work for very early entrepreneurs who come to Capsula Studio, I'd have three pieces of advice in 20 seconds. One is, we're actually over 20 seconds. One is you've got to be a leader. Don't expect anyone to lead you. You have to lead your team. You have to lead your investors. You have to lead your first partners. You've got to be a leader. Don't mistake persistence for stubbornness, which means you've got to be flexible. And I think the most important thing, even before you have a product, you've got to be customer obsessive. Because the startup, the one thing that you don't have is customers at the early stage. So you've got to be really customer obsessive, and extremely flexible, and great listening capabilities to understand what the market needs. So I think we're 1 minute and 3 seconds over. I'd like to thank very much the panel. I hope it's been interesting for you. Thank you.